my family goes away to do on vacation. We do puzzles, and ever since my kids were little, and one of the things that my kids like to do is pocket one of the pieces of the puzzle so that they get to be the person that gets the satisfaction of completing the puzzle. This movie feels like Robert and Susan pocketed that puzzle piece and now put it together, and it really makes me appreciate them as people, their family, and the dynamic I've been lucky to witness and sometimes even be a part of. Thanks for coming out. It was great. I got to see it without an audience and then with one, and it was a very, I find it very, very moving, touching, and uncanny in how things unfold in the film, much like in the life of Senior, and of course in echoing out through his family as well. I'd like to bring out some of the really talented, great people who've worked on this film, starting with the producer Kevin Ford. Kevin Ford. One of the other producers, Susan Downey, everybody, Susan Downey. And plays the wife in the film as well. and another producer and on-screen talent, Robert Downey Jr. And finally, the director, Chris Smith.
Finally.
Excellent job. I spoke so much before inviting them because I have done these with Robert before, and that's probably the last I'll get to speak. So
this is going to be 3 5-minute questions, and you'll have to extrapolate what you think we would have answered.
So just to, it was pointed out to me that the dynamic was that Kevin was working with Senior in New York. So as the movie forked into 2 productions, that's when this character was introduced in a more prominent way. But Chris, what's interesting to me as I watch it and put together that you had done an American movie, I don't know, it's about 20 years ago, you remember that film, American Movie?
Whoop.
It's so interesting in both of these that it's so hard to tell where the film that you're making is about the film that you're making within the film, and how that echoes through, and how one becomes the other, and how there's this sort of this permeable barrier between the lives of the people in it, the project they're making, and the project, and then the characters in it who are making both. And you weren't afraid of sort of keeping one from the other. I remember, if I remember correctly, in American Movie, they were all upset that they didn't get a take of sound, and then you realized that you had gotten the sound and gave the sound from the documentary to the film in it. So it's this weird snake eating its own tail thing. And then it also occurs to me that Senior's life is also like a movie at the same time as it's a movie. And your relationship, Robert, with Senior, how having the camera there and making this film really was a big puzzle piece in that relationship. Documentary filmmakers don't normally do that. Could you explain how is that something you sought out to do, or you were just unafraid of, or what led you to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a consequence of just what you fall into. I think, in the Rittenhouse Square section, it was in the first interview that Kevin and I did with Senior. He just said the thing he liked about documentaries was, he said the thing that they walked into it was, trust anything and anything can happen. And it was such an interesting thought that he had at the beginning that I think we both sort of just were like, oh, that's kind of the guiding light for this project.
It made it fascinating because the movie developed and changed as it happened, and I did not expect it to. It's several different movies all in one, but yet makes perfect sense. Robert, I don't even know what to ask you because it was so wonderful to watch you and your dad and your wife and your kids in that situation, and to understand that this project was a way for you to finally communicate in a way that I don't think you could have had you not been making the movie or spent that much time together. And in our business, like, we're buddies. When we're working together, we see each other every day. When we're not, we touch base every few weeks, sometimes it could be months at a time. So the movie becomes the thing, like in Hamlet, the play is the thing. And here you found yourself with this dynamic, and as your therapist said, your family lives its life through art, and that's how things come to be. What was it like for you as you watched the dynamic shift over the course of, hey, it would be fun to do a movie about or with Pops, to this is going to be the last act of my father's not just career but life on this planet?
Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. You're like a brother to me. Welcome to my family now. You've seen it all. I have nothing left to share. I have some of my best friends. I have some of my oldest friends here, and then I have y'all that are here tonight. Jon and I have the same shrink, so we have a shorthand. But we've been in this dialogue the whole time. As like you say, in storytelling, it's just so weird that this story, this thing we did, happens to actually be about my real life. So it's a little bit surreal. But again, it was the relationship with Kevin. If you notice at the end, under Chris's direction, my dad basically said he'd made peace with his life when he said, "When it happens, it happens." He was talking about the project, but the project was really about his existence and making sense of it. And so it was kind of this weird gift where, in offering him the forum to do this, it gave us this gift back. Yeah, is everybody okay, by the way? Okay, just want to check. It's some heavy stuff. Okay, good.
And Susan, I've known you as long as I've known Robert, and we've been working together and getting to know each other through the work. And this is sort of a metaphor for that, because you learn about people. And I know you knew Senior before. And in watching the relationship with Robert, you make an allusion in the film too, where Senior does, that you actually went through a loss as well over the course of it. And it feels like, as much as this is a movie about a man's career, and by the way, what a gift. I had known mostly through you about his body of work. I had known Putney Swope. But what a gift to show just select pieces and just walk through, just honoring how innovative and important to a generation, especially of other filmmakers, several generations of filmmakers that was. But this really became about learning to say goodbye to the generation that comes before, make peace with the fact that now you're raising the next generation of young ones and artists and beautiful, beautiful people. What was it like to go through this, both on the screen, even though you were behind the camera more so, but you're reconciling with all of these larger questions and stories, which is, I think, what's compelling about this, because this is a subject matter that doesn't find its way into a lot of movies nowadays, but yet here we're drawn into it in I think a rather uplifting and life-affirming way. How was that experience for you?
Well, it's interesting. I agree with you, Jon. I think that we don't look at, in Western culture certainly, we don't really look at death. And we try to pretend it's not going to happen, but it is sort of everybody's story, which is why I think this transcends just being about Robert and his dad and, all the oddballs in my family and everything that are featured here, and it becomes something much greater. But what was interesting, at least from my experience in producing it, is that I don't think we knew what we had or what it was going to be, because we really truly started with just, okay, Robert wants to do a doc about his dad that Chris is going to direct, and then all of a sudden Senior's like doing his own thing, and we're kind of following that story.
Split into two camps. What?
And we even had a cut of the movie when Senior was still incredibly mobile, and we thought there was going to be different endings. We didn't know what it was, and and even then it was kind of a beautiful portrait of a really wacky artist, and it was kind of incredibly inspirational in that regard. And even until when Robert went into, took Exton to see Senior at the end there, they just set up cameras and let Robert be in the room. So there weren't other people in the room when he was with his dad, trying to work up the courage in his conversation with his shrink and like ask him all these important questions. And you're at a point where Senior doesn't even know who he's talking to. And Robert left that room and he's like, we didn't get anything. Because he had all these, so you don't always know. And then once you're in post and you're kind of seeing something come together, and Chris did just an incredible job of making this make sense. And so I guess it's a long way of saying when we were doing it, I didn't have the perspective that I had once we were trying to figure out what it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kevin, you were there for that. And you were the embedded journalist. You were the on the front line. And I've been lucky enough to spend a short amount of time with Senior, but you really were, because you were in there running the cameras, and also you were running the edit. You were running the Avid there with him, and got to see a filmmaker, a prolific filmmaker, step back into that role, probably having never thought that he would again at that point in his life. And I see it in the film of how, and it's mentioned that you take on you kind of channel who you once were. What was it like to experience that, and what was that dynamic like as you got to go, be the Sherpa along with this, this mind that's very complicated and artistic and inspired?
Well, it changed my life for sure. You can't spend time with him, and kind of like PTA alludes to, and catch his rhythm. And so early on, when Robert said, "Okay, this is getting weird. We're all making the documentary, but my dad wants to bring you out to edit an alternate version of the same film." We all just said yes to the information, and I was actually really excited because it was a rare chance to collaborate with someone, who was totally into like filmmaking improv. And you see that in the edit where he's open to try things, and we kind of figured out. So his edit really truly is a mashup of his entire life. And it did become clear to me at a certain point that he was reliving his life. And that one day he actually said to me, "We've got to hurry because my window is closing." And it was very important for him. And I just felt like with the Parkinson's and with everything going on, there was like cognitive therapy happening. There was, there were things that were triggering memories for him. And a lot.
It's great that Kevin got the experience he wanted from my father, isn't it?
And
I think it was PTA and Kevin that my dad wished he'd had as a son instead of me. And then Chris and I were there. It's like, who are these two fucking guys?
I did often think, because I kind of got the best of Senior, but sometimes I would sit there and in all joking aside, I would think, it couldn't have been this rosy. I could tell that someone this committed to their artwork put what he put his family through at points might have been hell. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I did think there was a lot that came before this. I got to come in towards the end when we were having all this fun. But I also saw a lot of redemption in that. Robert coming to peace with his dad, and his dad definitely coming into peace with Robert, especially with the German song, which he wanted to watch over and over and over again.
I've sometimes felt that Robert has made me figuratively wear the lederhosen and sing when we've collaborated, and I see.
You're welcome.
Yes.
That's why you got that glowing introduction.
And it's amazing to watch who you are and how that your dad and your mom, who I had no context for at all, and just how free she was and joyful. And the thing that I think you really got from them is you see how much fun they're having and how much laughter there is all the way to the last breath. And I think the movie promises to say, and by the end of this, we're gonna figure out the secret and what the message is. And much like Senior, never owning up to him. By the way, I find it completely charming that the guy never takes a W for anything that he did. He just says, hey, we were just checking stuff out. We were trying things. I thought that was cool. This seemed like a good thing to do at the time. And he'll laugh about it, but he'll never give himself more than just laughing. And I see that in the two of your lives and the lives with the kids and with your friends and the big circle, the big family that's around you, and others who were in the film that are no longer with us. It was really, but then laughter in the face of all of that and mortality. And the message ultimately was, I mean, Senior you got the title you wanted, but everything else went his way in the movie. And he ended up really being the postscript on yet another Robert Downey Sr. movie with no clearly definable message or theme.
Well,
That just
I'll
makes
tell you,
feel a
it's
certain way.
so nuts too, because there was a minute there where Susan was like, this film, if you could call it that, is a fucking mess. Chris and I have got to wrestle this to the ground. All right, Kevin got this new edit. Now we're going to take that. We have to make this work. And I was like, yeah, that's your job.
But I think it really does, though, is the weird. It's like all the reviews, those snippets about what his work was. Like, this is definitely one of his movies too, And how does that feel to share the the duties of being the filmmaker when you had so many different points of view and voices? Because it really feels like a cohesive, coherent narrative, in spite of having this seemingly chaotic experience and trying to find your way to the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always feel like with documentaries that you're always trying to be a mirror to the world that you're invited or allowed into. And I feel like in this one, it wasn't just Senior, it was Senior and Robert. And I remember at some point in the middle, it was, I remember Robert was wrestling with the idea of like something along the line of like, I don't care if this isn't like weird enough. I want people to enjoy something. Where Senior had said to Kevin at some point, "We're not successful unless half the audience walks out during the movie."
But look, I think, Chris, like, you never take enough credit. You did wrestle this thing into something that managed to capture all the things that Jon was able, and hopefully the audience was able to glean from it. And we had sort of this structure and stuff laid out, and a lot of the sections, and Chris is like, I have an idea, and kind of disappeared for a few weeks and came back, and he had realized that the only way you were ever going to decode Senior was looking at what he had made and what he was making. And so that's when he chose to really examine his life through the movies and kind of look at what was in the movies to tell us, and all the way to the end with the last bit from Greasers with, the bingo bit, where he's clearly giving us a message.
For sure.
Well, that video, Susan just sent that randomly one day, like, I don't know, a few months before we were finishing, and we always ended with Robert under the tree, and it was very like poetic and
Kind of dour. We wanted something a little more upbeat.
And right when I saw that clip, it was so clear, because earlier Robert's like, talking to his dad and saying like, you don't like to tell people the meaning of anything, it's always obscure. And then Susan sent that clip with no context, no note or anything. And right when I watched it, I was like, oh, it's right here. The meaning of just being nice to each other is basically what, like, it came down to that for him. And it was there in front of us all along. And even working on this for 2 years, none of us kind of put that together. And it was like, and it just seemed so nice to give him that last word, which is like, in a down moment, there's still humor and everything else. So
I want to say, too, that my firstborn son, Indio Falconer Downey, is here, and the end credit song, Gone, which is that beautiful song, had kind of found its message there. Thank you for that. He's a big fan of Indio's music, and if you go back and check out that song, "Gone," the lyrics are literally exactly about what the story is trying to say.
So the legacy continues of mutual appreciation and inspiration around artistry in a family. And by the way, if this was a movie about an old fisherman, you would have been out on that boat, and that's where the heart to hearts would happen. And this just so happens that this family is a family of storytellers. So and it's still the part that I can't figure out is how the two of you embedded for so long in such a sensitive and meaningful chapter and I'm guessing you met through this project. Had you had a previous relationship with the Downey family?
So I have been working, with the Downeys for quite a while. My wife, Emily, who's here and was one of the producers on the film
Yes.
also. Emily Barclay
Ford.
She actually met with Chris, and they had talked about just general documentary ideas. And, Chris had done American Movie, as you mentioned, but also Jim and Andy. And anyway, we came back and we kind of talked about, was there a possibility of doing something with Robert? And he smartly said, not me, my dad. Chris was in, Emily was in, Susan, Robert, and it was that tight family. Even Chris's
And Ryan, the only crew member you ever see is Chris's partner, Ryan. That way we
sound.
know what we're doing.
I mean, yeah, it was truly a family production, and I think in a cool way that was fitting with the spirit of Senior. But there had been quite a short window of time before we all just got swept up and became a part of the family.
Well, it's a testament to all of you, honestly, because to work for it said 3 years. Is that how long it took? And probably more with
A little bit more, but yeah.
A little bit more. That everybody clearly was in service of something more than their own ego-driven idea of what this should be.
Well, and even Chris, and by the way, we could do a whole other documentary just of Sean Hayes and I doing that. So we might have to take it on the road. Thanks, Shawnee.
There's a 40-minute cut of that.
By the way, that was Dad. That was literally his last act. He was just watching the dailies from that. And Chris, who basically was a big director and had people shooting for him, hadn't picked up a camera in a decade, and kind of was inspired by his own volition, but also by Senior, and he shot it, and he and Ryan did it all, and so he was just there. And by the way, I forgot, we're almost done shooting, and Chris goes, we got to get you jumping out from behind. Jumping out from behind the bushes? Oh, fuck that! He goes, this is what your dad wants.
Robert, it's a funny story now, but he was not happy about that.
I was so chunky during the pandemic. Those are from Iron Man 3. Those are from the press junket with Paltrow in Germany. Anyway, they didn't fit.
Well, going back to the shooting thing,
You're right. Might as well.
it was. So I had met Robert once, but I didn't know anything. We were going out to shoot. I was like, should we be bringing big cameras? Should we have a full crew and all this stuff? And then it was like a few days before, it was just like, you can't bring any crew. I couldn't even bring anyone. And luckily I let them bring my partner and taught her how to do sound. And then I had to figure out I haven't picked up a camera in 10 years. And so showed up, and we showed up at their place. And the first thing Robert said, he just walked up and was like, there's nothing off limits. And then just walked away, and that was it. And so when you talk about...
In Sean's house, anyway.
So when you talk about that intimacy, it was just like from the beginning, it was like that was there.
Senior knew somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's it. And I've been given the time to wrap it up. So I will say this: I think it was wonderful watching Senior. You watch a story about somebody letting go and saying goodbye, and you sort of expect that person to drift away, but the opposite happens here. Everything starts to come together. It almost feels like he directed the events around it, not the film, but how things came together, and knowing what to say to each, what to ask for, just with minimal prompting, and then letting everything kind of just unfold as he did with his films. And so thank you for sharing this gift with us of showing us into your life.
Thank you all for sticking around.
Thank you.
You must have to use the restrooms. For that, I am most grateful. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.